Welcome again to the Armenian Studies program. This is our beginning of our spring lecture series, and we had a great semester last year with all the different guests that we had, and I sent out to some of you all of that information on email. And if you'd like to be on our email list, I have put out a paper out in the front, and you can sign your name in an email, and you'll know about all of our activities through the email. I want to tell you a little bit about our upcoming events before we get started with tonight's lecture. We have really an outstanding lineup of presentations coming up in the next couple of months. Actually, this Saturday, which is the 2nd of February, from 2 o'clock to 5 o'clock in the afternoon, Sevag Tateosian will be here from Armenia, and she's been here for the last 3 years to give an Armenian song and dance workshop. And she will be meeting in the South Gym, room 133 here on campus. And fortunately, that has been subsidized and financially helped by the students here on campus, the associated students. And so she is going to give that workshop for free. All you have to do is come at 2 o'clock, or a few minutes before 2 o'clock, to the South Gym, room 133. Please make sure that you wear soft-soled shoes, because it is a dance area, so they like to have that. Then, on Friday, February the 8th, you may have seen some flyers, and they're just being sent out actually this week, but I hope and some of the students haven't. If you're interested, would like a flyer, we're going to be presenting a symposium that is 4 speakers on the topic of Armenian Jerusalem, past and present. And this is especially timely because just a few days ago in Jerusalem, the new patriarch was elected. A new patriarch was elected after the death of Archbishop Torko Manukyan, the previous Patriarch of Jerusalem. So we're going to have 4 speakers giving different perspectives on Jerusalem, past and present. And that's going to be on Friday, February the 8th, here in this auditorium. And we're going to have a little reception before that with some food and drinks before. So you're welcome to come between 6:30 and 7:30. And then at 7:30 we'll have the symposium. Should be a very interesting presentation with lots of interesting and new material. You can read about it more on the flyers. In addition to that, a couple more events. I can open it up here. On February the 13th, Dr. Suren Manukyan, who is the Deputy Director of the Armenian Genocide Museum Institute in Yerevan, Armenia, he's been here in the United States on a Fulbright scholarship at Rutgers University, and he'll be visiting Fresno and Fresno State to give a talk about the Armenian genocide from the perspective, a new perspective, that of bystanders and victims. So he'll look at it both from the Turkish and Armenian perspectives. Some new information, I think, for all of us to hear. That's going to be on Wednesday, February the 13th. And then on Wednesday, February the 27th, we're going to have the first in a series of 3-part lectures by our new visiting professor. As some of you know, for the past 12 years, 13 years, we've had what's called the Henry S. Kazan Visiting Professorship in Armenian Studies. And so every year or every other year, we invite a prominent scholar to come and give 3 talks, public talks, and then also to teach 1 class on a different subject, usually revolving around modern Armenian history and the Armenian genocide. I'm very happy to introduce tonight to you Dr. Sona Haratunian, who is a professor at the University of Venice, and she is here as our 10th Kazan visiting professor. Dr. Haratunian. We will get a chance to meet her and talk to her as we do a formal presentation at the first talk, which will be on February the 27th. That will be our first presentation. She's here with her family. You'll get to meet her family and just get to know her a little bit more. And it's part of our lecture series that she'll be giving 3 lectures over the course of the semester. So we have lots of different things going on. On March the 17th, the Armenian Studies program is having its annual banquet. And this year, there are a couple of important things happening in the university. One is that Dr. Welty is retiring after 21 years as president of Fresno State. So we will be recognizing him at the banquet. Dr. Welty is president of the university, and he will be retiring this year. But I'm happy to say that we're going to have a special presentation by 2 people that are familiar with our audience here in Fresno, Matthew Karanian and Robert Kurkcan, who are the authors of Armenia Karabakh, the guidebook, are going to present on their newest book, and they're going to give a pictorial view of the creative journey of how they made their travelogue. It's a wonderful presentation, beautiful pictures, and they'll be our main guests at the Armenian Studies banquet. You'll receive invitations in the mail in the next couple of weeks. Finally, I want to also introduce some of our students, the Armenian Students Organization. We have our president, Hagop Ohanessian. Hagop, just raise your hand. We also have Marine Vartanyan, who is the vice president, next to him. Bartush Mesropian was last year's ASO president, Bartush. And then Kevlar Kajamian is the public relations officer for the ASO. So I wanted to introduce them to you. They have a variety of activities during the semester that I would like to let you know about. A couple of them. One is that they will be selling t-shirts, ASO t-shirts, the student organization t-shirts, and there's sign-ups for them outside so that when you leave you can kind of take a look at the beautiful design that they did, and if you're interested you could purchase one, pre-purchase. They're also selling a fundraising card which has discounts for Armenian merchants here in town. So if you frequent Armenian merchants, restaurants, different kinds of places, you can buy this card and it'll give you a percentage discount. They'll explain all of that to you. So we're very happy to have the students here tonight. Now let's go to the really the main part of what is tonight, which is the introduction of our main speaker, Dr. Ron Marchese, who's going to give a presentation on Treasures of Faith, Sacred Objects from the Armenian Churches of Constantinople, and what they tell us about Armenian society and culture. And this is the first in our lecture series, as I mentioned a little bit earlier. I would especially like to thank the Leon S. Peters Foundation for helping to financially support this lecture, because they have given a generous donation this year to the Armenian Studies program to be used for our lecture series. So it's going to enable us to do even more than we've done in the past. So we're very grateful to the Leon S. Peters Foundation, and also again the Associated Students of Fresno State have also assisted us with some financial support for tonight's presentation. 3 years ago, Dr. Marchese was here at Fresno to give a talk about his research with Dr. Marlene Brew in Constantinople at the Armenian churches in Constantinople. And tonight will be a continuation of that because they're working on their second book. And he's going to talk to you a little bit about the first book as well. But he has a second book in the works on the metalwork produced by Armenians living in Constantinople. For the past several years, he's been doing research in Constantinople, working especially at the Armenian Patriarch of Constantinople. And he has been researching the art objects found there at the more than 30 Armenian churches. Most people don't realize that Constantinople had one of the largest Armenian populations of any city in the former Ottoman Empire. In fact, that reached almost 250,000 by the turn of the 20th century. Another fact that I find very interesting also is that between the period of 1750 and 1850, in the 18th and 19th century, approximately half of all of the Armenian churches in Constantinople were founded. In other words, it was a period when lots and lots of different Armenian churches were being built. And basically tonight's lecture is going to be about the art objects produced, but about some other research that he is engaged in, dealing with the question of the society, Armenian society. And he'll talk about the Amiras, the very wealthiest Armenians, but he's also going to talk about everyday Armenians, some people that are not really talked about in the histories, traditional histories. So it's a very exciting lecture that we're going to have tonight. I also want to mention that the Archaeological Society here in Fresno, the Fresno County Archaeological Society, has invited Dr. Marchese to come back on March the 4th to give a lecture on a similar talk. It's going to be different, also on the sacred art from the Armenian Orthodox churches of Istanbul. Why does Dr. Marchese feel so much at home here in Fresno? Well, he was born in Fresno and went to Fresno State, and his parents still live in Fresno. And he's a graduate, as I said, of Fresno State, and the professor that inspired him was Dr. Louise Nalbandian, who passed away in 1974, but Dr. Marchese took history courses from her. He then continued and got his PhD in history from New York University, and he's currently professor of ancient history and archaeology at the University of Minnesota in Duluth. he would invite all of you over there, but it's a little bit warm over there now, so he doesn't really want to invite you. What was the latest temperature? So
it'll be -6 tomorrow, and Wednesday night.
-6. So if you know about cold, that gets pretty cold over there. Well, without any further introduction, it's my pleasure on behalf of the Armenian Studies program to introduce our guest speaker tonight, Dr. Ron Marchese.
Barlow, thank you very much. Really appreciate the introduction. And over the course of our associations, we've developed a very strong and wonderful friendship, not only as colleagues. We've had wonderful discussions on the modern Middle East and things of this nature over numerous cups of coffee. So this is really a pleasure for me. More often than not, when students go on for their advanced work in a specific discipline, they very rarely do get invitations back to their alma mater. And I must admit, in all honesty, I really do feel very honored about the invitation, not only tonight but also in the past, and the one that will come through the American Institute of Archaeology. So the topic tonight, there's going to be an awful lot of data, and I'm not going to try to bore you. We're going to have some of the text that is going to be on the screen. I'll try to read that to you as well. But the amount of data that we've been able to generate very much impressed His Beatitude Mesrop II prior to his very severe illness. And we can only hope that in the future those patriarchs that will represent the Armenian population in Constantinople, Istanbul, and all of Turkey will continue on some of the encouragement for research on that community in the 17th, 18th, and 19th century. What we're looking at tonight are actually treasures of faith, what they tell us about the Armenian community. That is, artifacts that are used or sacred objects that are used during the divine liturgy. They do tell us an awful lot about society, about the laity, not only in terms of their social status and structure, but they also provide us with a wonderful example of the brilliant talent of Armenian artisans that had gained a tremendous reputation within the Ottoman Empire in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries. They were an instrumental population in the maintenance of the Ottoman authorities and their ability to govern a very, very diverse world. And this certainly starts to materialize in the mid-1700s and continues on. This slide here, just wanted to thank those that have made the invitation, the Armenian Studies program, the Department of Anthropology at California State University at Fresno, also the Archaeological Institute of America. I am lecturing for them again this year. This is the third time that I have been so fortunate to have had the opportunity to lecture for this international organization. Some of it has been based on my research and work with colleagues in Greece, which I will be lecturing on tomorrow in the same room for the Department of Anthropology at 6 o'clock. My colleague Marlene Brew and I have been studying the textiles and the religious objects from the city of Istanbul or Constantinople since 1998, right after His Beatitude Mesrop II became patriarch. He is educated in the United States, and he was very receptive to our ideas when we were approached by some of the board members from the Church of Saints Thaddeus and Bartholomew. Once we looked at the material, realized that we really did need the approval of the Patriarch to examine not just one church collection, but a whole host of church collections, which are extremely valuable in our understanding of the general society and social makeup of the Armenian community. His Beatitude, certainly I hope that you will offer prayers for him as he is suffering perhaps the final days or months of his life. He's been gravely ill. We've also worked with Archbishop Aro Mateshian. He is the acting patriarch right now and has been for a few years. His demands upon the church boards to allow us to look at some of their materials in the depots of individual churches was instrumental in us having access to some brilliant objects, as he's holding here, a beautiful chalice of the early 19th century, late 18th century. He actually had to threaten some of the boards of directors that if they didn't participate and cooperate with us, they wouldn't get a priest to say the Sunday service if that church was going to be. So using a little strong arm tactics, but he's a wonderful individual, and we owe much to him in relation to the process of the study. There has now been a new museum established at the Patriarchate, including paintings as well as precious objects that are housed now at the Patriarchate. This is Deacon Varashag Seropian. He was instrumental in helping us translate the inscriptions on many of the pieces. And those inscriptions really did start to flesh out the community of Kumkapi, Yenikapi, Samatya, and Istaniye. These are districts within Istanbul that had heavy concentrations of Armenians. They were, as a population, one of the largest of the minority populations, and I would use that word in quotes, because people don't realize, even if you follow the Ottoman history, the Ottoman census records, which always indicated populations by religion, the Christian population up until about 1875 was in the majority in the city. There was about 30% or so that were Greek Orthodox, and close to 30% that were also Armenian in nature. And so the city actually still held a very strong Christian heritage up until the late 19th century. And the sad point is that people don't realize this, that the contributions of the Christian community after the capture of Constantinople by Mehmet II, that population contributed substantially to the recovery of the city in the 15th, 16th, and 17th centuries. And certainly from the 17th century onwards, Armenian immigration, though had started earlier, Armenian immigration from the east helped revitalize the economy of the city to the point that it became a major cosmopolitan center, an artistic center, and in many respects, one of the great centers of the early modern world. It was not so much purely under the Ottomans, but those populations that were proud to call themselves, more than anything else, Istanbulers. And that includes a substantial population of Armenians. The book, the first volume of the two-volume set, is over there on the left-hand side on the screen. This is Splendor and Pageantry, Textile Treasures from the Armenian Orthodox Churches of Istanbul. It did win a major award just this past year from the Textile Society of America. As I said, the Shep Ethnic Textiles Book Award of 2011. We felt very honored. My colleague did not want to submit the book because the book at the time was expensive. It was $150, and we had to submit 3 copies to the board of directors. Okay, of course they did not give us the books back. So they got copies for free, but we feel very honored by this. Not so much for ourselves, and please, this is from the heart. This is about the community. We are only the facilitator, bringing forward this material that has been ignored. Even Mesrab II, his beatitude, had no knowledge of the fact that the individual depots in the functioning churches today contain such brilliant treasures. In fact, what was interesting with the textiles especially is that many of the women, because it's gender specific, many of the women that were working at the Patriarchate and at the Holy Mother of God Cathedral actually came out when we had the materials brought from other churches, and they were impressed at what their ancestors had indeed constructed. This was an extension of the domestic tradition, but what you'll see some of the slides, brilliant, absolutely brilliant work that rivals some of the finest examples of manuscript illuminations of the 13th century, but in a more difficult medium of cloth, thread, and needle. So we do feel very honored. The book, obviously I have to do this for the publisher. The book is available on Amazon.com and you can't get a discount, okay? And if you order tonight, you'll get it in 3 or 4 days. But it has received rave reviews and we are very, very pleased to have been, as I said, the facilitator of this wonderful heritage that has gone ignored. Now, as I said, I will read some of the text here and just follow along as you wish. The history of a people can be documented by the physical objects they produce and use. Objects communicate social identity and help define societal values and moral principles. The collection of objects in the Armenian Orthodox churches of Istanbul confirm these views. The interconnection between material culture, social identity, artisanship, and communal beliefs. Making objects for the church was a pious act with each item considered a statement of faith. Contributions from one's own hand instilled within the maker a sense of fulfillment and involvement in the spiritual life of the community. Consequently, objects of faith were commissioned by church members as personal and communal expressions glorifying God. They illustrate a deep attachment to Armenian Christian values and culture, as well as an adherence to Christian beliefs in an otherwise Muslim world. Religious arts. The arts are the fingerprints of a nation, left behind throughout the ages for others to examine, admire, and learn. It is a window through which the soul of a nation is portrayed. It is a reflection of its culture during triumph, defeat, joy, and sorrow. In Armenian art, all aspects of religious art, primacy is almost always placed on the unique manifestations expressed in church architecture and the brilliance of illuminated manuscripts, the enhancement of the Word of God. But Armenian art goes beyond just those brilliant expressions of unique architecture and the use of a wonderful palette of color and expression, not the somber dark colors of Greek Orthodox manuscript illumination, but there's a more joyful expression in the use of color, the facial tones and so forth, that really make the illuminated manuscript tradition and the Armenian tradition especially quite unique. The architecture in Armenia, as well as in Eastern Anatolia, is very unique, does not follow the principles that we see within Greek Orthodox architecture or in the Latin Rite or the Gothic cathedrals that grace Western Europe. It is indeed quite unique. Maybe that's befitting the first nation to convert to Christianity. And so the area is covered, that is modern Armenia and its ancient and medieval extensions in the Eastern Anatolia, do provide us with a wonderful example of the brilliance of interpretation of traditional architectural forms that reflect the vitality of the people of this region. In Armenian Christian architecture, interior space was and is much smaller than that of their Christian counterparts in the Latin West and Orthodox East. I firmly believe that this is a conscious decision by the architects themselves. Space is more intimate in nature and restrictive as well. It creates more of a bond, perhaps, within the general community than the spacious and grand expressions that we see elsewhere. Certainly the manuscript illuminations stand out as brilliant examples of Armenian artisans. But this is the work of scriptoria, of monasteries. If we make a comparison between the Greek Orthodox tradition of icon painting or of manuscript illumination, we don't see this brilliance of color. The tones and the use of color is more somber in nature, whereas here my general feeling is that there is a general rejoicing in in the story of Christ and of the saints and of St. Gregory, all expressed in, as I said, wonderful examples of illuminated manuscripts. But this is not the only tradition that really stands out. Okay, we're just going to use a few examples here. This comes from a book that was produced in Cilicia, 1223. It is a well-known manuscript, but I was able to, it's now housed in the museum at the Patriarchate in Istanbul. And having access to this plus reliquaries was a great honor for me to be able to page through the manuscript in Armenian and admire these wonderful illuminated pages. Now, within the Ottoman world, what I've done here is to project basically the overall Armenian populations. The populations are very, the size of the circles indeed indicate the overall density of population in terms of numbers. And it is very important to realize that this was not a small population of individuals. It was a substantial population, in the hundreds of thousands in specific districts, especially in eastern Anatolia. But they were also located elsewhere, in Iran, in Iraq, in India, as well as in central and eastern Anatolia, also in Constantinople. Okay, if we take a look at the density of Armenian populations from the 15th to the 20th century, again, these circles indicate the distribution just in Anatolia itself. And so one of the things that really indeed does bother me very much is the revisionism that has unfortunately taken place with the denial of this population's importance, not only in terms of its impact upon a pre-Ottoman world, but also the impact that they had within the Ottoman world. They were considered the most valuable and loyal population of the Sultan, especially after the Greek War of Independence in 1827. And so in many respects, they were instrumental. These people, your family, the generations of the past in this audience held a very, very important position in the welfare of this large empire. Anatolia, areas of migration to Constantinople, post-15th century. And this is very important here. These are considered, in many respects, regional styles in these circles here, especially in an embroidery tradition. They all come from this eastern area of Anatolia, but they eventually all fuse together in the cosmopolitan atmosphere of Constantinople. It is very likely that, especially in the embroidery tradition, that these styles that were different, okay, drawn from the Armenian heritage, would never have fused together into a cosmopolitan style that we now call the Constantinople style, okay? There were a number of areas or a number of cities that were classified as patriarchates. Certainly the one here in Istanbul, there was one in Ankara, down here in Siz, Van area, in Etchmiadzin, Yerevan area. And so if we break these down based upon their areas of jurisdiction, it looks relatively equal. By the 1750s, Istanbul, the Patriarchate of Istanbul was the most important. It was the one that the Ottomans recognized. And even from Etchmiadzin, the Patriarch or Catholicos would have to work through the office of the Patriarch of Istanbul and all Turkey to get access to the Ottoman Divan. This was an extremely powerful patriarchate. It was the one that the Ottoman authorities recognized as having jurisdiction over all others, including Jerusalem, which I didn't have, which is down here. Therefore, it became a magnet to attract artisans from all over the Armenian world. And these individuals gained very valuable commissions, not only for the emerging social elites of Constantinople that were of Armenian heritage, but also for the Ottomans, because the talent of the craftsmen were recognized by the Divan. And eventually, by 1800, you have Armenians in charge of the Ottoman mint. in charge of the Ottoman gunpowder mills, okay, and other major offices within the state. These individuals were known for their administrative talent, and many actually became friends with the Ottoman authorities, including the Sultan and the Sultana. So they were no minor population. And through their positions, they were able to provide protection and benefits, and certainly a little on the side for themselves, okay? Let's don't be too altruistic, for the community. By the 17th century, the evolution of the Constantinople style patterned an increase in the Armenian population of the city. Continuous Armenian migration from the eastern, central, and western Anatolia infused the city with a number of regional and sub-regional styles that added bold elements to an otherwise conservative and exhausted urban material culture that was mostly Byzantine in nature. By the 18th century, European cultural influence into the oriental flavor of the Ottoman capital fostered a more cosmopolitan atmosphere that enhanced experimentation outside the accepted canons of Armenian church art. What's also quite fascinating about that statement is towards the end of the 18th century and definitely into the early 19th century, many Armenian families sent their children to Europe to be educated. They were educated in France, in Italy, and elsewhere. And many of these individuals, these children that came back, they came back with a body of knowledge that sort of helped to jumpstart a more conservative tradition. It also creates tension. They were infused with the ideas of the Enlightenment, infused with the ideas of the French Revolution, infused with the ideas of the Commune of 1848 in Paris, ideas of libertas, equality, and this challenge, which we'll see later, the old hierarchies, Armenian hierarchies, that dominated the social and political structure of the Armenian millet. So we do get an educational and political revolution, okay? Not just the impact upon material culture, and we'll see some of those brilliant examples in a few minutes, but also in the social makeup of society. Okay, Eastern Anatolia, these are regional and sub-regional styles in terms of art, and these are what people bring to Istanbul. You've got to remember, culture doesn't weigh anything. It's how you view things, how you interpret things, the knowledge you possess in relation to constructing items or objects. They're not conservative in nature. If they are influenced by newer styles that are emerging, those artisans adopt to the newer style and create a hybrid. Artistic experimentation needed patrons. And this is a problem after the 14th century, 15th century. Armenia, more often than not, was not politically independent. Who were the primary patrons? Well, the church becomes a major patron, of course, but in almost all artistic experimentation, you do need patrons. Although the church was initially the source of such patronage, this was eventually surpassed by an Armenian aristocracy that starts to emerge, especially in Constantinople, after 1750. This is the Emira class. Its wealth and social status within the Armenian community attracted Armenian artisans and their families to the city in order to gain valuable commissions. This continuous flow of talent refreshed the Constantinople style with new ideas for interpreting, common themes. In this manner, artistic achievement matched the growing opulence and grandeur of a city that many Armenians came to love as their own. Through their labor, Istanbul and the church prospered, and in time, the Armenian community became one of the most important ethnic groups in the city. This is a map that I created that was adopted by Richard and Simon in their last book, Ovanessian on Armenian Constantinople. And they had never visualized, these are brilliant Armenian scholars, but they had never visualized the distribution of Armenian churches in the city. Okay, 72 of them. 72. 55 of the Orthodox tradition, 12 of the Catholic tradition, and then whatever the residual that's left over are of the Protestant tradition. It's not just one or two churches, and as is the case in Rome, every church had a spectacular piece of art, a true masterpiece, either in terms of the painting over the altar or in the valuable contributions from the lay community, the artisans that produced brilliant work in cloth and metal. Brilliant pieces of artistic achievement in those crafts. This was used as the front cover for the book. I felt very honored about that. So, but they made me obviously do a lot of work too. Though that's not good enough. Can change it here. Now, if we look at these churches, we don't know the size of the congregations, but we can use specific economic theories to determine the general size of each congregation. But one thing that is evident is that we have high concentrations here, near the Patriarchate, across the way in Astania. That is the area of the galley yards, okay, where the Ottoman fleet was located in the Golden Horn. And then there is Haruti and Bejian, one of the most important Armenians of the early 19th century. His church was in Uskadar, and that is the Church of the Holy Cross, which was by far the richest of all the Armenian churches. It's right there, and I think that one is the Church of St. John. Okay? But the church in Uskadar was extremely wealthy, and I want to give you one example of its wealth. One of the problems we have in terms of Armenian art, especially in the 17th, 18th, and 19th centuries, is that the Ottomans had no coherent currency standard or currency policy. In the wars with Russia especially, these wars were very, very costly. The Sultan, through the Armenian elites and the Patriarchate, would issue what we would call in Latin edicta, edicts or mandates, mandata, calling in contributions. What that meant was that all metal objects of gold and silver had to carry a stamp of its purity. It also carried a tura, the Ottoman stamp of the reigning sultan. That guaranteed the purity of the metal. The Church of the Holy Cross at Uskadar had to contribute in 1789 for the Ottoman war against Russia 6,000 kilos of gold and silver. Now, many of those were in jajanks or reliquaries. Unfortunately, I did not get the photograph because if I did, I think it may bring tears to your eyes. It does to me, just the memory of it. In the Patriarchate a few years back, in a small room, there was from the floor to the ceiling and on the floor and on desks and so forth, relics. We don't know who they're from, saints or whatever, because all of the inscriptions of the relics would have been on the standards that they were placed in, that is the reliquaries. The relics meant nothing to the Ottomans. It was the gold and the silver that encased them that did. And none of those, no one has any idea. They were just collected from the 1,600 or so churches that had formerly been part of the Armenian heritage in Anatolia. And in that manner, you can't destroy them, you can't throw them away because they are consecrated with chrism. They're blessed, okay? They're sanctified. They're the remains of, centuries, with no data whatsoever. I did not get a photograph of that, but it is burnt in my mind and also the mind of my colleague, because it was just over to the side before you go, before you go up to the grand stairway into the upper apartments of the Patriarchate. You've got to remember that the Patriarchate becomes the repository of all those churches that disappeared in Anatolia in the 20th century. Now, there's something else that we can look at, too, in terms of using some archaeological techniques as a trained archaeologist, again, and social scientist, is that we can, use a multidisciplinary approach in relation to the discussion of human culture and populations and so forth. This deals with the concentration of silversmiths. Largest concentrations are here and here near the Patriarchate. Obviously here in Uskadar, very rich parish, okay, and also going up the Bosphorus here. In Kumkapi alone, there were 33 silversmiths that were functioning. 33 separate families and shops. Okay, districts of Yenikapi and Kumkapi, this is down on the Sea of Marmara. The Patriarchate is right there. I think my little arrow is working, yes. The Holy Mother of God Cathedral, this is the new Matufian Center for youth that is dedicated to Mesrab. Just opened a few years ago. Physical context that exists in relation to the churches, especially of Istanbul. They are different than those churches in Eastern Anatolia and Armenia. There are restrictions, certainly within the Islamic world, towards the decoration of exterior walls. We do get some uniformity. Church architecture, single and multi-nave structures with side chapels, barrel-vaulted ceilings, interior are beautifully designed in neoclassical design, exterior non-conspicuous, blending, again, intimate space. Neighborhoods that these churches served were either ethnically homogeneous Armenian or mixed neighborhoods, either Christian, Greek Orthodox, and or Turkish Muslim. Epigraphic context, the colophons and the inscriptions on the objects reconstructed, and identify the social hierarchies of the Armenian community by neighborhood and within the city. This is the church in Beşiktaş. You can see the exterior wall here that separates the profane from the sacred. It also provides protection for the church from potential hostilities. The interiors, we would classify this in American architecture as the federal style, very brilliant and very beautiful in relation to the backdrop for the profession of the divine liturgy. Okay? How did the Armenians in Constantinople in the early modern period develop a concrete internal imagery of the gospel narrative? Very simple. Armenian churches are not covered with frescoes and mosaics. There are notable exceptions, such as the church at Akhtamar in Van, also in New Jolfa or Isfahan. Okay, there were no stained glass windows. Okay, there certainly is an impressive array of illuminated gospels, but they weren't readily available to the rank and file. There were also liturgical books, hymnals, and so forth. The sole items readily available to all the faithful, beside the occasional painting, usually above the altar, were those on display during church services. And what were they? They were textiles. They were metal objects. They were those things that became, as I said, treasures of faith that were used as part of the divine liturgy. Liturgical objects, crosses, reliquaries, silver gospel covers, chalices, censers, and lamps. Many of these were displayed in the type of architectural imagery that we saw in the earlier slides. Together they served to concretize the episodes of Christ's life for the ordinary Armenian. Now we'll take a look at some of the embroideries. This is one of the earliest ones we have, 1680 in nature. There is a wonderful inscription on the bottom. This crowns St. Kirkus Church in the memory of Hoja Sahak and his father, so-and-so, and his mother in the year 1130 or 1680. One of the very few examples where we do get a rendition of biblical scenes. This one is probably the oldest. It has a lot of Byzantine influence. It probably dates to the 16th century. This is a gift from Hoja Magari and his brother Melkon. Revered crown is composed as an ornament for a patriarch. Other examples. Notice the miniature tradition here. And it's also three-dimensional. The other ones are flat, which sort of imitate, I think it's a very good statement here. I'm going to be discussing this with a good colleague of mine at City University in New York. It reflects more of the weaving tradition, the flat weaving tradition of the late Byzantine tradition. Most of the Armenian liturgical garments end up becoming three-dimensional in nature through the use of multiple layers of silk as well as metal thread that's precious thread. This one dates to 1779. The crown is for the enjoyment of Zachariah, Patriarch of Constantinople, and the second Leligay of Holy Echmiadzin in the year 1228. And the story here is a very interesting one. It's not a story that deals with the Passion of Christ or the biblical narrative of his life, but it deals with St. Gregory. It's the only one that we did indeed see. Gregory, in terms of the conversion of the Armenian royal family, and on the reverse on one side is his Epiphany, the appearance of Christ at Echmiadzin, instructing Gregory to build the first churches in Armenia. The size of the facial expressions are smaller than your little fingernail. These are not large examples. And so one of the items that we argued, myself and my colleague, is that we had indeed a very interesting miniature tradition that rivaled that of the illuminated manuscripts. And please, for the females in the audience, this is women's work, and rightfully so. The ability to create such wonderful, wonderful items as part of their participation in the Mass. For the enjoyment of Pulgas, Vardapet gave this as a memorial gift to the Holy Mother of God Church in Bursa, 1800. Now, right here, this is the soldier at the tomb. Here's Peter and Paul. Again, these images are about the size of your fingernail. This is all silk here. This is gold wire and silver wire, pearls. When I first showed this at a medieval conference in Kalamazoo, Michigan, people thought that this was a large panel. And when I said that the face of the centurion here was the size of my thumbnail, which is not that big, okay, I thought we were all going to pass out because they took a deep collective breath and all the oxygen disappeared from the lecture. The silk here, the pupils of the eyes, the shading, this is all very fine silk. This one is even more spectacular. It comes from a vakas, a collar that is worn by the priest. It shows the crucifixion. The facial characteristics are very subtle, the crown of thorns. But what's interesting, you could see that the artisan, the woman here, has tried to capture the general anatomy of a body that would be not only exposed, but stretched in the process of crucifixion. It is very likely that none of these women that provided finery for the church had anatomical training whatsoever. This is all carried over from the domestic tradition. This cartouche, even though it looks large, is 9 centimeters. It's that much, that big. Where the arrows point, you can see the droplets of blood, the wound, the side of Christ. This is done in a very difficult medium. It is easy to create three-dimensional imagery in manuscript illumination. It's through the process of shading, where you add color and you blend it. Here you have to build up the body, the arms. They're not flat. They stand 1 to 2 centimeters off of the base cloth. And you can't see it from no more than 10 feet. And you'd say, why? Why do you spend that type of energy to produce it? Because you don't give crap to God, that's why. Very simple. You employ the Virgin Mary, the Mother of God, please make my hands become your instrument. I'm Italian. I had my grandmother say that when she'd make raviolis. Okay? She'd employ Santa Maria, okay, to roll the dough, and so they didn't break in the pot when they were being boiled. That's why it's the same tradition. This example here of the Good Shepherd was the only example we found. It certainly has a lot of Western influence, but again, it's a relatively small image done in silk and gold. Now, liturgical garments were confiscated by the state. The jewels would have been taken off, and they would have been burned for the metal to be extracted. So again, these are prized items in the Armenian community today. They only provide us with a little example. Now, if we go into the metallurgy and metalwork, okay, these are from standards, Jajonks, okay? We have the biblical narrative. Christ with the cross is not so awake disciples, and this little image is the size of my index finger's fingernail. Okay? Why would an artisan do this? Well, again, as I said, you show your talent. We do get crowns, and again, I've used some of these, I've mixed them up a little bit because this is important, because of the inscription from the Church of the Holy Cross. Marchese, the person and the individuals mentioned were pilgrims, either to Echmiadzin or to Jerusalem. Chalice covers. Now, the example we see over here to the right is more of a Greek Orthodox tradition. And so there is give and take within the Christian communities. They do share a variety of motifs overall. The inscriptions on the side, these concentric circles and so forth, provide us with the inscription at the bottom, dated to 1813. This is one of my favorites. This is probably somewhere in the 1700s. It comes from Uskadar, and this is one of the most brilliant examples of the Agnus Dei, the Lamb of God, that I have ever seen. This is all silver. You can see basically that it is three-dimensional in nature. It comes right off of the cloth. And each time we touch this, the cloth started to rip. It's still being used in the church. They now have stopped using it, and it's actually been framed. But it is a brilliant example. This is all gold thread, the radiating sunburst. The angels here, Gabriel and Michael, are always shown together. This actually is human hair here, and again, the facial characteristics are relatively small. This is how they would appear on the altar, with the upper part here over the paten, with the chalice below. When we look at the individual collars, again, we have this wonderful inscription. They were duplicated at times. Here we have the 12 apostles. And again, these are relatively small overall. So we have a very, very good miniature tradition here within the cloth, within the religious finery, the textiles that are used. The one to the right was quite fascinating. When I showed it to the Archbishop, he said, well, those are the 12 apostles. And I went, well, we got a few that are women. Oh, they're not the 12 apostles. Well, whatever. It's a tree of life. It's the family of Abraham. And here at the bottom, it's really kind of interesting. It's done in that wonderful, I hate to use the word, the primitive tradition, but at the bottom here is Abraham / Christ with the New Testament here, and springing from this is this tree of life, and at the very top is God the Father and then the Holy Spirit. One of the things that's very interesting is that in the manuscript illuminations and in relief work in churches that we do have some examples of, especially in Ane and in Akhtamar and elsewhere, in those canons of high religious art, God the Father is never shown. Okay? Never shown. In fact, one major scholar at New York University in the Institute of Fine Arts actually said that God the Father the Almighty God, Almighty Father is never shown. But he didn't look at any of the textiles, which comes from a domestic tradition. God the Father is always viewed, either in the nimbus form as a representation, or in physical form with facial features. Always. And here we get, so when Archbishop Tateosian said, it's the apostles, I went, well, you've got God the Father, the Holy Spirit, okay, and you've got to complete the Trinity. But here, Christ is in the character of Abraham, because all the other characters here are Old Testament. So there's a duality here. Very brilliant by the composer, again, an anonymous woman that created this. The one to the left, this is spectacular. The small images are absolutely unbelievable. Now, the previous slide were stamps and marks. One of the points that Barlow had mentioned, and we have talked about this in our sojourns, is this. Between 1750, 1775 to about 1850, the number of new Armenian churches being built or renovated is substantial. Over half of the Armenian churches in Istanbul, Constantinople, were constructed during this time. That indicates a substantial increase in population. That is, churches to serve the community, and a community that was growing, not so much by generating more children per se, but by immigration. Okay? Harutian Bejian, probably the most wealthy Armenian of the late 18th and early 19th century, revered by the entire community, established a school of embroidery for Armenian girls to meet the needs of these churches. Because you've got to remember, within the Orthodox tradition, as well as in the Latin Rite, we have feast days of saints. Every day is a feast day. Geez, I mean, give it a rest, you know. But, you know, the Protestants went too far. They ignored it all. But there are feast days. And every feast day has to have liturgical garments. They have to have altar covers, because it's a recognition of that individual who lived according, in the Latin word, imitatio Christi, the imitation of Christ's life. Okay, and so we get it from the individuals and families that we have here on inscriptions. And in 1830, Harutian Bejian established an embroidery school for Armenian girls to be trained and to continue on in their domestic tradition. The monumental and the miniature. These are altar screens here. And that fits very nicely into an architectural scheme. Okay? And then here, the miniature tradition from individual mitres. Again, many of these large altar screens are 16 feet long by 10 feet high. Heavily embroidered, gold and silver thread. Some have inscriptions. Behold the Lamb of God who bears the sins of the world. This is the table of holiness. This curtain is a memorial gift to St. Nicholas Church of Topkapi, and then it lists the individuals, 1894. This one is very interesting because all of the facial characteristics are Oriental. It probably comes from India. It's a stamped altar curtain. And there was a very large Armenian population in Madras, India. This is from that stole. This shows a very unique tradition drawn from Western embroidery. That image of the Virgin Mary, the Mother of God, is, again, no more than 9 centimeters. It's about that big. Okay? And look at the folds of the drapery and so forth. This captures the high, literally almost the high Renaissance tradition of painting. There's again 2 examples. This is all embroidery. All embroidery. Now, one of the problems with embroidery, okay, is this. You have a cartoon, and it's maybe fleshed out. You go up and down, up and down. You don't. By doing that, you're destroying the fabric by punching holes in it. You have to separate out the warp and the weft. Okay, because you want the embroidery to be part of the base cloth. And it can only become part of the base cloth if it is interconnected with the warp and weft of the woven garment before you enhance it. So please don't ask what type of tools they used and how long did it take, which everybody asks, because we can't answer it. Textiles in use, as I said, Mesrob actually stated on one of the examples, it weighed over 55 pounds, okay? And that's with precious stones, gold, silver, and freshwater pearls. And he said it was a real bear, and it was hotter than hell because he was consecrated as patriarch in it. And he had a first-hand recollection of how uncomfortable it was. But it was a brilliant piece that dated to right around 1800. The inscriptions from liturgical metalwork also underline that the craftsmen and artists responsible for their execution were predominantly laymen, especially in these late centuries. This is in marked contrast to those who produced Armenian manuscripts. Scribes and artists were almost without exception clergymen, usually working within a monastery, that is the scriptorium of a monastery. In general, in an isolated or near isolated rural environment. Metalworkers, whether crafting objects in iron, bronze, or copper, or jewelers working with silver, gold, and precious stones, were an urban phenomenon. And they worked in an urban or semi-urban environment, towns or villages. As for liturgical vestments, altar curtains, chalice covers, and other textiles are reserved for the female creators. This tripartite division of the arts and crafts in medieval and early modern Armenia, clergy, craftsmen, women with textiles, has not been sufficiently studied until just recently when we've started doing this work, and will probably yield, or at least I hope so, interesting information on the social stratification that existed within Armenian life. In this way, that is, by creating liturgical art, the church succeeded in integrating all elements of society in its daily ritual. Okay? Now, who were these people who made donations? This holy radiance is in memory of the boys who are in Istanbul for the enjoyment of Everig's Kayseri, St. Taurus's church, St. Theodore's church. Amen. Forced labor. This is in memory of the boys that are in Istanbul. They never returned home. This is called in Turkish the sürgün, also in Arabic. The state demanded a head tax. And that head tax was the seizure, and that's the best word to use. The seizure of youth to work in Esteniye, the shipyards of Constantinople. They were given one garment a year by the state. Some worked as labor only, others were artisans. And I think in many respects that's exactly what this refers to. It is an example of those people in Kayseri that had to give to the state by law labor. It's a very moving piece. The other point that we have to make is, how do you depict that which is not depictable? Did you ever think about that? Well, you make an attempt. And we see this in the artisanship expressed in metal. Okay, we're going to skip some of the text and just go right to the objects. We already had seen this in terms of silversmiths. And here we're going to get some of the examples. Okay, this is early mid-19th century. It's more in the Second Empire period of French art. This example here already tells the individuals it's a fake. It's not silver. Okay? Why? Being afraid of being confiscated. Okay? If it was done in precious metal, it would have an Ottoman stamp, as well as purity. This is dated to about 1850. Here's the tour of the Sultan Mahmud. You can see that back here along the bottom. There are the assayer's marks here. This indicates in Armenian silver, and there is the stamp of the producer. This is from Üsküdar. And again, the examples from Üsküdar are some of the finest examples of 19th century liturgical art. Standards of this nature are carried during the Divine Liturgy. Okay? Here is our example again that we had seen. These formed a set of 6 objects or items. They had survived. I really enjoyed this photograph here because here Christ is looking back at his image, the Vera icon. And it is going to appear this way in the second volume. Here to here is about that far, okay? Only about that far. It looks much larger here, obviously, in terms of the context, but it isn't. Chalices, some of the finest examples of chalices, again, come from Uskadar. This has not only vertical, but also horizontal imagery. A despondent Christ here with the instrument of his passion. A dejected Christ here in the Garden of Gethsemane. And that's what it looks like there. We've got a vertical composition as well as horizontal composition. But this is my favorite on the base. The blood of Christ. But where is it coming from? The body and blood. It's coming from the Sacred Heart, the heart. Okay, if you notice it right here. Into the vat with the grapes, and this creates the liquid. Okay? Because the chalice is the cup of life. This motif, by the way, is not reproduced anywhere else in any of the examples we saw, either in textiles or in metal. It not only is unique, it's both enamel as well as gold and silver, but it's a brilliant composition because it has numerous axes, vertical as well as horizontal. At the base, at the stem, and at the cup of life. And then vertically on each individual side as you rotate it. It's a brilliant piece of metallurgy, one of the finest I've ever seen. This Holy Cross is in memory of Usta Gazar's wife at the gate of the Holy Cross Church, 1780. So we have numerous examples of items that were used on the churches, on the altars. Incense boxes, this is one of my favorites. Here, reliquaries dated to 1745. I, sinful Alina, am the daughter of Oscan. O holy children of holy Zion, O clerics, pray for mercy at the feet of saints for my sinful self, for my parents Oscan and Sultan Pasha, my brothers, and my entire family. Beautiful reliquary. We also get large altar pieces. This was a memorial gift from Haruti and Bejion just before he passed away. They were not even aware, that is in the Church of the Holy Cross. Let's see if I can go back. Yeah. Okay, whatever. In the Church of the Holy Cross, this piece had been used for 150 years on the altar. And so as we were photographing it and studying it, there's an inscription there. And the person that was watching us, he was like, what? There's no inscription. So he goes over there and looks. What's it say? My God, it's Haruti and Bejion. He kept on. Haruti. They didn't even know that it was a dedication from Haruti and Bejion in 1830, given to his church in Uskadar until we started photographing it and studying pieces in under minute detail. Couldn't believe it. Another large reliquary. This vestry is a memory of the soul of the late Mina Samira. Again, you see these titles are starting to pop up on the objects. Here's one of my favorite examples. It's a Myron vessel for the sacred chrism. And at the bottom, it has the example of Pentecost. One of the very few examples we have, okay? And all these pieces move, the wings and all that type of stuff of the Holy Spirit. So again, no inscription on this, so we have no idea. There were others that were very important. This was a cross that was given to the Patriarch Golod, who was instrumental in establishing the Second Armenian Renaissance, especially in artistic endeavors. Good example here, 1743. A small cross, but just beautifully done. Okay. Donations from the fishermen. This is a small kayak. It's about that big. It hangs from a chandelier. And it's a beautiful example of 19th century silversmithing. Donated. belt buckles. Now we're going to call it quits in a few minutes, so they'll just hang in there with me. We're going to look at colophones and what they tell us. Okay, don't worry about the text. We're just going to skip that. That's more explanatory in nature. O celebrant holy priest, remember from the Lamb, before the Lamb of God, me, and the person's name, who gave this memorial gift together with my daughters who are asleep in Christ, and then lists them as such, 1837. Remember, Lord, the soul of Marchese, means pilgrim, and the souls of all those asleep, in whose memory this chalice was placed at the gate of the holy archangels in Balat. 1814, January 6th. Very important date. That's the date of the Epiphany and the blessing of the waters and St. Gregory, St. Basil, sorry. This is a gift of Theotokos, Holy Mother of God Church, in memory of Matesi Sima and his wife, Miriam and sons, and so forth, 1818. Other reliquaries. A silver pyxis in the memory of the soul of the venerable so-and-so Amira. Now these names start to appear, and they're very important. They are not part of the official list, either in the patriarchal records or in the Ottoman records, of the 165 names of those individuals that were classified as emirs. We are seeing the lay community of the neighborhood churches starting to usurp the titles of dignitaries, stating the fact that they are just as important as those people that are giving money to build churches. Okay? They're using the same titles and the same names that define them. Aga, Amira, Matesi. What we have here is the emergence of the petty bourgeoisie. The emerging middle class of the Armenian community, first generation maybe merchants that are going to send their kids to Europe and then are going to come back and revitalize the political demands of those people who want a say in the choosing of a patriarch, and therefore also the rights of individuals in relation to the oligarchy that had ruled Istanbul and the Armenian community since the 1700s. And they're using the same names, the same titles, but they are not recognized either by the Armenian aristocracy or the Ottoman state, but they are recognized by their congregations as people that sat on the boards of directors that paid for those treasures of faith to elaborate in the ceremony of the Mass. This holy radiance is a memory of the boys, again, of Istanbul. We had already gone through that. This wonderful holy cross is the reliquary for the greater part of the little finger, the wonder working of the right hand of the holy forerunner, St. John the Precursor. It is a memorial gift from the great Prince Takis Amira, son of the late Aslan, a benevolent and pious man. Now he talks about himself, being native of Armtan, at present of Byzantium. This virtuous great prince, I think he's trying to convince God that he's not a bad guy, is the servant of the king for his parents who are at rest in Christ, and also for his wrongdoings. He has deposited as a memorial gift this consecrated holy cross together with the relic enclosed in it. Okay. Then we have some others here. I'm going to be looking for just a specific one, but as I said, you get an idea of the types of objects we've been looking at within the individual churches. Okay, here's one from a guild master and ironsmith. This is a gift to the Holy Illuminator Church in memory of Demir Jabashi, the ironsmith, son of Matasi Petros, in the year 1802. Here's one that the person is very, very proud of the fact that on the day of their 25th wedding anniversary, this individual to the Holy Mother of God Church in Yenikoi, which is one of the major districts, and then he states how much silver is in the damn lamp. Well, you know, that's not a good idea, especially if it's going to be perhaps confiscated by the state. But he is very proud of the fact that he gave something of very high value. Okay? We have others that are dedicated to priests, those who enjoyed using it, and so forth. Okay? Looking for one again. Here we get renowned Hagopa Mira is donated to the Holy Church of Besiktas, now girded with gems. And now he's going to talk about all the things that he put in this reliquary, girded with gems and silver, and it is bequeathed to the same church in memory of the soul of Miss Herpsine, daughter of Hovhannes Amira Tateosian, okay, the royal superintendent of ammunition. And he is one of the ones that is listed in that 165 names, 1865. Very interesting one here. Opposite the iron post of Kumkapi, urged by the barber customers. The customers of a barber shop. Whichever of the officiating priests reads this holy gospel, we all beg him to remember all of us during the divine liturgy and before the immortal Lamb of Christ. This was written by the sinful and worthless Deacon Thomas of Constantinople. I've always found, I should probably put that down. This book has been written by the worthless Ron Marchese. Okay, and go from there. This is a memorial gift from Matesi Geriko Aga. Again, he doesn't appear. Now, let's look at what this does as we come to a conclusion. You're going to say, thank God. Okay, now, we have the Ottoman state here, the Divan. We have the Amira class here, Armenian Amira class, circa 1750-1850. From the Divan, these recognize social status as empowered elites by serving the state. Okay? Represent the millet at the Ottoman court. That is, these guys here represent the community here. They also choose the patriarch, the patriarch. So they're powerful, real powerful. They control who sits as the supreme patriarch of all Armenians, number one. They are the tool of the Ottomans in very important industries, and they represent the entire congregation at the court. Okay? These people here recognize the authority and their status. Donations, church construction primarily. Now, Patriarchate and the Ottomans. Recognized authority to govern the millet. That's the patriarch. But who governs the millet? The ones that choose the patriarch. These guys here. Recognize the authority to rule. The patriarch recognizes the authority of the sultan to govern all individuals in the empire. Period. Now what about the Armenian millet? It's a rigid social class structure circa 1800. After 1800, we start seeing the usurpation of these titles by individuals from the millet, the Armenian community. Armenian educational and political revolution after 1850. Actually, it begins about 1825. And those are the ones that will establish the foundations for the national constitution. It is both an internal confrontation and an external confrontation. Now again, we're going to pass this over. This just explains what the Amirna class and the millet were. We're going to go to the other items. Armenian oligarchy challenged after 1850. Again, here we go. The Divan, okay, and these guys. But here's the change, right here. He's going to challenge the authority of a very set group of individuals. After 1850, the formation of an Armenian middle class, they use the same titles as the old Amira class, not recognized by the Ottoman Divan or the Armenian elite, okay? But recognized by their local congregations here. And these are the ones that give us the personal donations made in the celebration in the divine liturgy, okay? Now, Barlow and I have talked about the importance of being recognized. You cannot go into Harlem and talk to African American individuals and say, I've got soul. They're going to laugh at you. It's got to be recognized by others. They tell you if you have soul, if you're simpatico in Greek. They tell you you have it. You can't declare it. So what do we get? The Ottoman Divan does not recognize these people. The recognition of the Armenian elite, not recognized. But this is what happened. Recognized by the congregations, instrumental in breaking the power of the old oligarchy, donations on a more personal basis. local congregations. And within those local congregations, we get local elites that use the title as Amir and Aga, small merchants, tradesmen, jewelers, etc. Internal and external revolution after 1850. A social and political restructuring based upon enlightened principles of self-rule and equality. And some of the driving forces in this idea of education were the Emiras themselves. Okay? The focus of the Armenian millet was the Patriarchate, and it is the institution that the conservative Emira class controlled for over a century. Since Armenian national life, secular and religious, revolved around the Patriarchate, the control of this institution meant control over the entire millet, its clerical representatives, control of the charitable agencies, education, and the general lives of the lay community. In many respects, through the selection of patriarchs and controlling the boards of local churches, these emiras were able to exercise their will in both secular and religious matters. This would eventually be challenged by the mid-19th century by Armenian intellectuals, as well as the guilds of the artisans or the esnafs, as we had talked about earlier, Barlow and I. Armenian craftsmen and merchants were well organized at the end of the 18th century. 65 guilds existed in Istanbul. By the first quarter of the 19th century, these esnafs, with the merchants, the tuchars, began to challenge the position of the Emira class and their control over the millet. A potent alliance of young Armenian intellectuals, artisan guilds, merchants, entrepreneurs, and industrialists, as well as the divisions and rivalries within the Emira class itself, was created. The financial transformation of the Ottoman state, and finally the emergence of an Armenian national constitution, eventually curtailed the Emira dominance over the Patriarchate and the millet. In this manner, modernization processes affected the conservative elite and their ability to survive the structural changes taking place not only in the Ottoman state, but in the Armenian community. This monolithic class had internal rivalries as well. And we actually see this where some of the emiras dedicate reliquaries to other emiras as an offering to form an alliance as they're under assault. And they're listed, and those people that are listed are in that upper order. And so they're trying to solidify their position in a vastly changing world. This is what we can extract from these artifacts. My colleague, no, she was not encased in the museum forever, though I would have liked to many times. That's another story, another lecture. But it's a beautiful museum, and it does rival the museum, certainly in Etchmiadzin and the community in Istanbul, Constantinople. Many individuals of the Armenian community that are well-to-do provided substantial amounts of money for this. They're very proud of their heritage, and rightfully so. This is just a small miniature, as I said, to depict that which is not depictable. And then finally, two fine examples of metallurgy dated to the 19th century. Thank you.